is go through the examples of the proofs for the Bible in the British Museum. And I'm going to be starting here in the Assyrian section. I'm going to be reading the quotations from this book that discuss what these exhibits are and what their meaning is in the Bible. The commentaries that I'll be reading are the commentaries from this book. They're not necessarily what I believe. And if I can, I'm going to try and add in what I believe to be correct. Thank you. Kirk Stela of Shalmaneser III. According to the book, this is from document 15. This round-top stela or monolith was found at Kirk on the Tigris in southeastern Turkey in 1861. It bears a relief carving of King Shalmaneser III of Assyria facing the symbol of four gods, from left to right: Asur, Ishtar, Anu, and Sin. That's up in the top left there. Across the front, including the sculpture, on the back of the stela are inscribed 102 lines of cuneiform recording the principal events of his first 6 military campaigns. Let's take a look at that. I hope that's visible. You can see the cuneiform writing just barely. In the account of his 6th year, 853 BC, inscribed here on the back in one of those writings, he describes his campaign to the west, where he encountered a coalition of states, including Aleppo, Hamath, Aram, Israel, and Ammon, at Karper on the river Orontes, where he defeated them in battle. The size of each contingent is listed. That of Adad Idri, that's the biblical Ben-Hadad, from 2 Kings 6:24 and 8:7 of Damascus, consisting of 1,200 chariots, 1,200 cavalry, 20,000 infantry, and such. Obelisk of Shalmaneser III. This 4-sided stone obelisk, discovered and layered in 1846, is decorated with 5 rows of relief sculptures depicting the bringing of attribute to the Assyrian king, each tributary occupying 4 panels around the faces of the obelisk, and each identified by a line of script above the scenes. On the stepped top of the obelisk and on the lower part, also on all 4 sides, are 190 lines of text describing the principal events of 31 military campaigns conducted by Shalmaneser to the Mediterranean in the west, Cilicia in the northwest, and Media in the east, and Babylonia and the Gulf in the south. He directed his campaigns against, in 841 and 838 BC, Adad Idri appears in the Bible as Ben-Hadad, and Hazazel as his successor in 2 Kings 9:14, 10:32, 12:17, and 13:22. Of particular interest for biblical archaeology is the second series of sculptured reliefs because there is no mention of the event in the main text. The caption above identifies these scenes as representing the Israelite king Jehu bringing tribute to Shalmaneser. An event which isn't mentioned in the Bible. The inscription reads, "The tribute of Jehu the Israelite," and continues, "Silver, gold, a golden bowl, a golden vase, golden tumblers, golden buckets, tin, a staff for a king, and hunting spears I received." The relief scenes show on side 1 Shalmaneser below the winged symbol of the Assyrian god Ashur. Let's find that. Relief scenes show on side 1 Shalmaneser below the winged symbol of the Assyrian god Ashur, supported by 2 retainers receiving the tribute from a dignitary, possibly not necessarily Jehu himself, who bows on the ground before him. That's either this one or this one. This is the lower one. Jehu was not the son of Omri, and was in fact a usurper of the throne from Omri's descendant Jehoram. But Omri had been such a prominent ruler in his day that the Assyrians referred to Israel as Bit Humri, the house of Omri. And it is clear from other Assyrian texts that Mar Humri, literally the son of Omri, was really only a shorter way of saying Mar Bit Humri, son of the house of Omri, or Israelite. This is the other sides. lighting's not the greatest here. The reliefs from the siege of Lachish. The second book of Chronicles states that when Sennacherib invaded Palestine in 701 BC, he established his headquarters in front of Lachish and that he dispatched his senior officers to Jerusalem from there. We find that in 2 Chronicles 32, verse 9. Neither the Old Testament nor his own annuals say more about the fate of Lachish, but the long series of reliefs from his palace at Nineveh illustrate what happened to it. The Assyrian troops are shown advancing from the left. Maybe from here. The city is attacked with wheeled, armored battering rams onto which one soldier is pouring water against burning brands thrown down by the soldiers. Which looks like that, right there. To the right, the defended inhabitants are led out by Assyrian troops, some of whom carry braziers or incense stands. This looks like that scene. The incense stands. Like that. And the people being driven out. Perhaps from these brazier or incense stands, or perhaps from unorthodox religious rites, are saying. Further along, Sennacherib is shown on a throne in front of his camp, receiving the capitulation from an official. And again, the people being led out, and there's Sennacherib on his throne. Some of the upper details of the slabs are lost as a result of damage to the reliefs when the palace of Sennacherib was destroyed in 612 BC. And this inscription above Sennacherib this is a cuneiform writing. And it reads, Sennacherib, king of the world, king of Assyria. On a seat he sat in the booty of Lachish. Put the page name here. Before him it passed. The booty of Lachish, before him it passed. So he probably sat down and watched this place get pillaged. And here's the rest of that relief. So we see a lot of trees in here. Men on horseback. Again, Sennacherib. Those paying homage to him, either his soldiers, probably not. Probably the conquered Jews. Here we have the symbol of the conquest there, a man being killed. And those possibly dead people, quite likely. The children being let out with their families. Chariots, the incense stands again, and such. The camels taking off of whatever they can carry. Going backwards now to the siege again. They may have set up siege ramps. That may be what they're standing on. You see the archers. Here's the defenders in a tower. You can see the archer there on the left. Those with him. Again, more defenders of Lachish. Those men pouring water on the flaming brands they threw. Here's what the museum has to say about it. exists today, a mound destroyed. Here's a map of the area. There's Lachish down there. There's the Assyrians. They came quite a ways on foot and horse. A list of the Assyrian kings. Tiglath-Pileser, we've got that in the Bible. Ashurnasirpal, Shalmaneser. Tiglath-Pileser again. Esarhaddon. And here we have arrowheads and things that were dug up, stones from slings. That's a modern sling. Larger than what David used. There's an iron lance. That's a ornament. And this is a cylinder, which is a terracotta foundation document according to this. Inscribed with a record of Sennacherib's campaigns and of his rebuilding of Nineveh. The capture of Lachish and the siege of Jerusalem took place during his third campaign in 701 BC. His account of the siege is given in column 3, lines 38 to 81. These are relics of an Assyrian helmet. Let's see if that cylinder is in here. Scroll is. This is called the Annals of Sennacherib. It's listed in the book. A six-sided clay prism inscribed with an account of the first 8 military campaigns of Sennacherib, king of Assyria, 705 to 681 BC. It was found at Nebi Yunus, Nineveh, by Colonel R. Taylor in 1830. Much of the same text is preserved on a prism called the Chicago Prism in Chicago, Illinois, at the University of Chicago. In the account of his third campaign, which took place in 701 BC, Sennacherib describes his march to the west, where he defeated the Phoenicians, notably at Tyre and Sidon, and his move southwards, where he received tribute from Pudu-Ilu of Ammon, Kamu-Sunadbi of Moab, Aaramu of Edom, all in Transjordan, and Philistia, the Tinti of Ashdod, paid tribute, but Sidka of Ashkelon was rebellious, so Sennacherib replaced him with Sharuludari. According to the annals, Sennacherib now encountered an Egyptian army which was coming to the aid of the inhabitants of Palestine. The Egyptian commander is not named in the annals, but parallel biblical accounts identify him as Tirhakah in 2 Kings 19:19 and Isaiah 37:9. Tirhakah in the Egyptian sources, a Nubian who ruled as pharaoh from about 690 to 664 BC. Though Sennacherib's invasion took place some 10 years before Tirhakah became king, he was probably about 20 years old at the time and could have been in titular command of the Egyptian army. The biblical description of him as king of Nubia could simply reflect an addition of the text dating from a time after he became king. The best known passage in this description states that because Hezekiah had not submitted to the Assyrian yoke, Sennacherib laid siege to 45 Judean cities, deported 200,000 people, and invested Hezekiah in Jerusalem. This event is described from the other point of view in 2 Kings 18 verses 17 through chapter 19 verse 36. Also Isaiah 36 through chapter 37 verse 37, where 3 Assyrian officials, the Tartan, the Repsaris, and the Rebsaka are described as coming to the city. According to the biblical account, the Rebsaka shouted to the defenders, represented on the walls by three high officials as Eliakim, Shebna, and Joah, in Hebrew rather than Aramaic, which was by then a lingua franca in the Near East, calling on them to surrender. Hezekiah refused both on this occasion and subsequently when the Rebsaka returned after consultation with Sennacherib at Lachish. The biblical account concludes with a much debated statement that the Assyrian army was struck down in some way during the night with considerable loss of life, following which the siege was called off. Read that in 2 Kings chapter 19, verses 35 and 36, and Isaiah 27, verses 36 and 37. The Assyrian annals tacitly agree with the biblical version by making no claim that Jerusalem was taken, only describing tribute from Hezekiah of gold, silver, precious stones, valuable wood, furniture decorated with ivory, iron daggers, raw iron, and musicians. And you can cross-reference that with 2 Kings chapter 18, verses 13 through 16. This prism inscription is rich in information, but no mention is made of the siege of Lachish, which took place during the same campaign and which is illustrated by the famous series of reliefs in this museum. That was what we looked at previously. Let's see if we can zero in on that. You can see that this is cuneiform. A lot of reflection on the glass. I'm sorry about the picture quality. You see that this is all cuneiform writing.
We lived there, and we used to visit there before they even had a space. They just had them hanging down in old buildings, though. And it's exciting. I think the old airplanes are more exciting than the new ones. Yeah.
This is the relief of Sargon II. Sargon succeeded his brother Shalmaneser V as king of Assyria in 721 BC. And though in his annals he appears to claim that he conquered Samaria at the beginning of his reign, it is more likely that it was Shalmaneser V to whom this conquest is to be credited. His invasion and siege are referred to in 2 Kings 17 verse 5 and chapter 18 verse 9, when the conquest is attributed to the king of the king of Assyria in 2 Kings 17:6 and 18:10 through 11. Sometime in 723 or 722 BC, this should be Shalmaneser. When the Assyrians succeeded in conquering the city, they consolidated the position by deporting the principal inhabitants. In the case of Samaria, the king of Assyria, probably Shalmaneser V, is said to have deported Israelites to Syria, western Iran, and probably northeast Mesopotamia. You read that in 2 Kings 17:6. Sargon's apparent reference in his annals to the conquest of Samaria may refer to a campaign which he conducted to the west in 720 BC, deported 27,280 Israelites to Assyria, and brought in people from other conquered territories to replace them. In the Old Testament states that these new settlers, who included some from Cutha in Babylonia, set up images of their own god in 2 Kings chapter 17, verse 30 through 31. These were the ancestors of the Samaritans of the New Testament, people held in contempt by the Jews, whose foreign origins are reflected, for instance, in the reference to them by Josephus as Kutha-yoi, Kuthians. That's in Josephus' Antiquities of the Jews, 11, verse 88. Sargon is mentioned only once in the Old Testament, in Isaiah 20, verse 1, where he is said to have sent Tartan to attack Ashdod, an event which took place in 711 BC. Scenes from Sennacherib conquests. There's not too much listed in the guidebook as to the relevance between this and Old Testament writings, but that this man did exist and did conquer is undeniable. This is the Syrian the attack on the town of Alamu, about 700 to 692 BC. This is the campaign against the town of Alamu at the same time. This is all from Nineveh. These tell a story from here. There are prisoners, probably from a marsh battle such as that shown to the left. And here, right straight in front is that marsh. What's referring to is that. See the animals on the left. And the person right there. Changes anything else for them. And then march through groves of date palms with their families. You can see them there. And here. A soldier with several enemy heads who was awarded a bracelet. And then comes to right here. Those are heads. More of the campaign. The enemy, Chaldean or Aramean tribesmen, live in the marshland and use boats made from bundles of reeds. Some of them hide to escape, and most of them are captured and driven off to the right with their cattle to be inspected by the Assyrian king. Here where the battle begins. Those marks represent the reeds and the marsh that they live in. You see fish. Right there, that's fish. You see the crab right there on the left. And the boat's made out of reeds. There's a body with a head. And then being carried back. Now this is a relief of Tiglath-Pileser III, who is mentioned in the Bible, but this is not the one that's mentioned in the book. However, there is some information on that one. No one seems to know where it is. None of the guides can help me find it. I've been around here. But on this one, a carved stone relief showing Tiglath-Pileser III, king of Assyria, in his chariot, and above him a fortified city. on a mound would tell with Assyrian soldiers driving out prisoners and herds. Now we see something similar to that right here. On his chariot, I'm missing that part. The band of cuneiform across the middle gives part of the text of Tiglath-Pileser's annals and has no direct relation to the reliefs. But above the city is inscribed Astarte, which gives the name of the defeated city. This is probably the Old Testament Ashtaroth in northern Transjordan, Deuteronomy 1:14 and Joshua 9:10, a territory which was part of Aram in the period of the divided monarchy. The defeat depicted in this relief probably took place during one of the western campaigns of Tiglath-Pileser, which he conducted in the 6th, 11th, 18th, and 21st years. The city is shown on a typical cell, which would have grown up over centuries of building and rebuilding, a process in which the walls of the dilapidated buildings would have been demolished so that the rooms were filled with rubble, stumps of walls remaining buried, and then the next buildings erected on the level remains. Now this is not any of that, but this is what they do have with his name and specifically related to this man. Now let me show you what the document looks like, the carving that they're talking about. There's him being led by his people, and the slaves and the herds being driven by the men. It's him on his chariot. And that display is not around here. See some more information on him right here. Again, where his campaigns were. The stone. This inscribed stone slab was discovered in 1799 by Lieutenant P.E.X. Bouchard, a French officer of Napoleon's army in the western delta of Egypt, and was surrendered to the British according to the Treaty of Capitulation, which ended the war. Came to the British Museum in 1802. The stone, a black basalt, partially broken away, bears the remains of a bilingual Egyptian-Greek inscription in 3 scripts. The Egyptian text is given in both the hieroglyphic and Demotic scripts, and the Greek version is in the Greek uncial letters. That means it's in capital letters. The Greek text was soon translated, the Reverend S. Weston reading a paper on it before the Society of Antiquities in 1802. It contains a decree issued by the Assembly of Egyptian Priests in Memphis to celebrate the first anniversary of the coronation of Ptolemy Epiphanes, 204 to 180 BC, which had taken place in his 8th year, 197 BC. The inscription therefore dating from 196 BC. The hieroglyphic script would have been familiar to the Hebrews during their time in Egypt, and it may be assumed that Moses, who is said to have been adopted by Pharaoh's daughter in Exodus chapter 2, verse 10, would have learned to read and probably write it. This is not stated in the Old Testament, but in the speech given by Stephen, recorded in the book of Acts, Moses is described as having been instructed in all the wisdom of the Egyptians in Acts chapter 7, verse 22. This could well reflect a specific tradition not recorded in the Old Testament. Idra Mi. This very stylized statue was found together with its base at Tel Atshana, ancient Alalak, by Sir Leonard Woolley in 1939. It depicts Idri Mi, the ruler of Alalak in northern Syria, 1550 BC. And it has particular interest because it bears, virtually all over it, a cuneiform inscription of 104 lines giving his autobiography. It states that he was born in Aleppo. When trouble arose at home, he escaped first to Emar, then to Amiya in Canaan, and finally he took refuge with the Hapiru warriors. After 7 years, he was able to return and repossess Alalak, which had formed part of his kingdom of Aleppo in his father's time. In the inscription, it goes on to give an account of a treaty concluded with Baratatarna, king of Mitanni, tribute received from vassals, a campaign against the Hittites in the north, and his establishment of firm rule in his kingdom. Idrami's movements from city to city and his 7 years sojourn, apparently away from any city, is reminiscent of the wanderings of some of the Hebrew patriarchs. But this inscription is also interesting in containing the earliest known reference to Canaan, here written Ma'at Ki'in Anim, land of Canaan, lines 18 and 19 on his right arm. Though Canaanites are mentioned as early as the 18th century BC in a letter from Mari, Canaan is, of course, known from the Old Testament where it is written Kinaim, sometimes in the phrase Eres Kinaim, land of Canaan. Outside the Bible, the usage of the name in Egyptian texts, the Amarna letters, and alphabetic cuneiform tablets from Ras Shamra, ancient Ugarit, suggest that in the second half of the second millennium BC, the name Canaan described the area adjacent to the Mediterranean coast from about Gaza in the south to Al-Arida, more or less level with Homs in the north, and extending inland to the Jordan and Bekaa valleys. That is roughly the area occupied by modern Israel and Lebanon. This roughly corresponds to the area described in Numbers 34, 3 through 6, and Joshua 15, 1 through 4. The story of Tel Halaf, situated on the headwaters of the river Haber in northeastern Syria, the imposing mound of Tel Halaf, rising to a height of some 26 meters above plain level, has been occupied since the 6th millennium BC, according to these historians. The site has given its name to an important class of painted pottery, halafware, from this period. These are some of the reliefs dug up from there. Excavation of Tel Halaf between 1911 and 1929 revealed large areas of an early Iron Age city about 1200 and 900 BC. The city, known to the Assyrians as Guzana and called Gozan in the Old Testament. It was ruled by an Aramean family. These ivories, carved in the Phoenician style, were found in the royal palace of Samaria as a part of a cache which included winged sphinxes, winged goddesses, scenes of the child Horus sitting on a lotus, as well as palmette and lotus patterns. The wings of the sphinxes and other details were enhanced with blue glass inlays, some examples of which are shown at the bottom of the illustration. That's in the book itself here. These and other carved ivories from the Arslan Tash in Syria and Nimrud and Khorsabat in Assyria take the form of boxes, fan handles, and similar objects, as well as thin decorated plaques or small carved pieces, which could have been decorative elements for furniture. It is in the light of these references to ivory in the Old Testament are to be seen. In the 10th century, Solomon is said to have made a throne of ivory, 1 Kings 10:18. In the 9th century, mention is made of Ahab's ivory house, 1 Kings 22-39. And in the 8th century, the prophet Amos names ivory houses among other luxuries due for divine destruction in Israel, and that's in Amos 3:15, and condemns those who lie on beds of ivory, Amos 6:4. The ivory houses would probably simply have been palaces or pavilions furnished with wooden chairs or thrones and beds, decorated with carved ivory and possibly with ivory paneling on the walls. When these ivories were discovered at Samaria, they were immediately connected with Ahab's ivory house, but their archaeological context does not give them any precise date, and they could have been deposited in the palace at any time between its foundation in the early 9th century and its destruction in 722 BC. The related group found in the palace of Sargon, to which they have been taken from Phoenicia as booty, make a more precise dating possible because the palace was only built near the end of the 8th century. And even assuming the ivories were not new at the time, they were unlikely to have been made 30 or 40 years earlier. This means that the Samaria ivories are probably to be dated in the 8th century, and that the reference in the book of Amos are the closest in date. Here's a close-up view of some of these, how intricate they are. Now that piece right there is only like 3 inches across. That's pretty detailed. Here's one similar in design. There's no description of these to what it actually stands for. And here's a man carrying a deer. There's his hunting puppy. We have this. A crown or an emblem of some type. Looks like winged horses, maybe? Maybe someone paying homage to something. These are like the tiles they spoke of. There's the back of an animal. There's what looks like a winged lion with a man's head. Again, we see the same type of design, winged lion with a man's head. Pieces off. Detail. That piece is only the size of a dollar bill. Right there. And some smaller carved pieces. Size of silver dollars, half dollars, quarters. There's some others that are the size of playing cards. This is the Atrahasis epic. Genesis was known to the Hebrews as Bereshit in the beginning, from its first word. And in the same way, the Babylonians referred to one of their compositions as Enuba Ilu Awilum, when the gods like men, from its opening words. Points of particular interest in this composition from the biblical point of view are of the creation of man and the flood. The combination of clay with blood and the account of the creation of man reflects similar ideas to those found in the Old Testament, where man is described as having been formed of the dust or earth to which he would return in Genesis 3:19, and where it is stated that the life is in the blood in Leviticus 17:11. In other respects, the creation accounts in Genesis and Atrahasis have little in common. This is another of the Annals of Sennacherib. And in here they have the siege of Jerusalem translated. This we've seen in other inscriptions. The Egyptian commander is not named in the annals, but parallel biblical accounts identify him as Tirhakah, 2 Kings 19:19 and Isaiah 37:9. The best-known passage in this description states that because Hezekiah had not submitted to the Assyrian yoke, Sennacherib laid siege to 46 fortified Judean cities, deported 200,000 people, and invested Hezekiah in Jerusalem. This event is described from the Jewish point of view in 2 Kings 18, verse 17, through chapter 19, verse 36, along with Isaiah 36, verse 1, through Isaiah chapter 37:37. The biblical account concludes with the much debated statement that the Assyrian army was struck down in some way during the night with considerable loss of life, following which the siege was called off. That's in 2 Kings 19, 35 through 36, and Isaiah 27, 36 through 37. The Assyrian annals agree with the biblical version by making no claim that Jerusalem was taken, only describing tribute from Hezekiah of gold, silver, precious stones, valuable woods, iron daggers, raw iron, and musicians. And that can be checked in 2 Kings 18, verses 13 through 16. And this is the inscription of Ashurbanipal, king of Assyria, from Nineveh. Certainly a friendly man. This is in the cuneiform also. How would you like to translate that? In English, as best as you can do that. Well, yeah, but you speak the language.
No, it's not the first language.
Say it in Hebrew. Say it in Hebrew. Whatever you can say on that.
נאספה בית עולמה האישה הזקונה, הצנועה, הצדקת, החסידה, משתאה, מכבדת הזקן, החסיד, הענב, הטוב, וירא שמיים. I don't know what is the date. יום י"ב לחודש אב, שנת כ"ט לשטרות. That's it. This is the date, יום ב'.
Thank you.
Av, you know, there's Hebrew month, Jewish month. You know.
Yod.
Yes,
Okay.
Jewish month. And there's, it's different than the Christian month. You know, the January, February,
Your
March.
first month is.
Tishrei. Tishrei. It's called Tishrei.
But that's near the
Rosh
the
Hashanah.
Passover is in the first month, isn't it?
No, Rosh Hashanah.
Rosh Hashanah. Okay.
In the Bible, before Moses get out from Egypt,
Yeah.
Nisan,
Well, the first month is Nisan.
First month was Nisan, but
Yeah.
after that they changed it to Tishrei. It was Tishrei is the first month.
Rosh Hashanah is the Day of Atonement, right?
Rosh Hashanah it's
The-
it's like
The day the priests entered the temple for the sins
yes,
of Israel.
First
Right.
first month in the year. You know.
For Leviticus, what we call Leviticus 16, chapter 16, I think.
I really don't know.
That's in the Old Testament, yeah.
It's Rosh Hashanah, you know, Yom Kippurim.
Oh no, I think Yom Kippur is what I'm thinking
Yom
of.
Kippur, it's the 10th day of the beginning.
The 10th day of the first
Yes,
month.
of the first, yes. It's Yom Kippur. Rosh Hashanah, there's 2 days, you know. The first and the second day, we celebrate
The New Year?
the New Year, yes.
Okay, okay.
And after that, it's Yom Kippurim. And Sukkot, you know Sukkot.
Sukkot,
It's in the 15 days, in the same month.
I keep forgetting.
Sukkot.
I have it written down on my Bible, but I
they-
can't remember.
they-
No, I'm a Christian.
But,
But,
it's written in the Bible.
We study the Old Testament a lot.
Yes.
We,
Understand?
yeah.
Understand?
Are you?
No, but
Right now?
we used to live the 3 years.
I know that's the
yes,
kind of
before
English you
we came
speak.
here. What?
That's her English accent. It's from the
Yes,
States.
because she learned, she studied there.
Are you living in Israel now?
I'm living in Israel. She lives here. My mom lives here.
Were you there in the war?
Yes, I'm in the army now.
Inscription discovered in 1870 by C. Clermont Ganneau was not fully deciphered until 1953 by N. Avigad, largely because its extreme rough surface made the characters very difficult to see. They'd been marked with a white pigment to make them more legible. It was located as the lintel in a rock-cut tomb and refers to the burial. The script may be dated 7th century BC, and the language is standard Hebrew. It begins, "This is the tomb of," and the name is wiped out. The last part of it is Yah, the royal steward. And goes on to say that there is no silver or gold here, only his bones and the bones of his maidservant, and concludes by cursing any man who open it. The phrase Sur la Habyat is known from the Old Testament as a designation of an official whose post seems to increase in importance over the centuries, first applying to a sort of palace administrator in 1 Kings 4:6 and 16:9, then to an officer with political responsibilities in 1 Kings 18:3-4, and by the 7th century to the senior minister of the kingdom, 2 Kings 10:5, 15:5, 18:18, and 19:2. The official bearing this title at the time of Hezekiah, Shebna, was berated by Isaiah for carving himself a tomb in the rocky hillside, Isaiah 22:15-25. And this has led to quite plausible speculation that the present inscription comes from the tomb of Shebna. The name of the owner is partly destroyed, and what survives, the divine ending, Yah, does not correspond to the form of the name given in Isaiah, which is Sebna, but the form Seben Yahu, which does occur in Nehemiah 9:4, is generally recognized as a fuller form of the same name, so the identity of the two, and therefore the attribution of this inscription to Shebna, or Shebniah, the royal steward of Hezekiah, is a distinct possibility. Stone. The black basalt stela bearing A 35-line alphabetic inscription was first seen in 1868 at Divan, ancient Divan, by Reverend F.A. Klein. It was subsequently smashed by the local Bedouin, but a paper squeeze had been taken, and from it a copy of the text was published by T. Nodecki in 1870. And 2 large and 18 smaller surviving fragments were joined together accordingly in the Louvre, which had acquired them in 1873, to produce the restored form of the stela, which may now be seen in Paris. This text begins, Mit misben Chims milk mid. Translation, I am Misha, son of Chemosh, king of Moab. And goes on to say that the Omri, king of Israel, had oppressed Moab for many days, and that his son did the same. So Misha mounted a rebellion. The details of the ensuing war accompanying the rest of the inscription. The war of Israel against Moab is narrated in 2 Kings 3, 4-27. Misha's father is not named, but a fragment of another inscribed stela found in 1958 at El Kirak in Jordan has made possible its restoration as Chemoshat. Among the proper names mentioned on the stela, some of them known from the Old Testament, the divine name Yahweh appears in the statement that Misha, having captured an Israelite town, took from there the vessels of Yahweh and dragged them before Chemosh, lines 17 and 18. Somewhere around there. Inscription of Nabonidus. This cylinder, one of 4 bearing the same text found at the 4 corners of the ziggurat at Ur, is inscribed in Babylonian cuneiform with an account of its rebuilding by Nabonidus. The inscription records that he learned from early inscriptions that the ziggurat had been begun by Ur-Nemu and completed by Shulgi, kings of the 3rd dynasty of Ur, some 1,500 years earlier. Nabonidus says that he constructed it on its old foundations and concludes the inscription with a prayer to the moon god Sin, to whom the ziggurat was consecrated. This prayer is of a particular interest since it ends with a plea of piety for, and I'm quoting now, Belshazzar, the son of the firstborn, the offspring of my heart. This references, of course, to Belshazzar, who figures prominently in the book of Daniel, where he is described as a king of Babylon, like in Daniel 5:1. It is clear from other inscriptions that Nabonidus spent several years of his reign in the northwest Arabia, during which Belshazzar ruled in Babylon in his place. And though he is not included in the king's list, he was king in all but name during that time, and the biblical statement may be understood in that light. The cuneiform text shows that the designation of Daniel as the 3rd ruler in the kingdom, Daniel 5:29, makes sense, Nabonidus in Arabia being first, and Belshazzar in Babylon being second. It is worth mentioning that the description of Nebuchadnezzar as the father of Belshazzar in the Old Testament, Daniel 5:2 and 11, is probably simply an example of the use of father to mean forbear. Let's get a closer look. This is what's known as a Babylonian Chronicle. This tablet forms part of a series which summarizes the principal events of each year. Each annual entry is separated from the next by a horizontal line and begins with a reference to the year of the reign of the king in question. The present tablet, which covers the year 605 to 594 BC, is of particular interest from the point of view of biblical archaeology because of the entry for the 7th year of Nebuchadnezzar, 598 to 597 BC. The text, lines 11 and 13 on the back, says, "In the 7th year, the month of Kislevu, the king of Akkad mustered his troops, marched to the Hadiland, and encamped against the city of Judah. And on the 2nd day of the month of Adaru, he seized the city and captured the king. He appointed there a king of his heart, and received its heavy tribute, and sent it to Babylon." In this passage, it is clear from the preceding entries that the king of Akkad was Nebuchadnezzar. The Hadiland was Syria-Palestine, and the city of Judah was Jerusalem. The text is therefore saying that Nebuchadnezzar led his army to Syria-Palestine, besieged Jerusalem, and captured it. The Babylonian year began in March-April of the Western calendar, and Kislevu, the 9 of the 12 months, would correspond to November-December, fell in this instance in the winter of 598. The 2nd of Adaru corresponded to the 15th or 16th March of the Western calendar, so the importance of this text is that it fixes the date of the first fall of Jerusalem to 16 March 597 BC, an event recurred to in 2 Kings 24, 10 through 17, which identifies the deposed king as Jehoiakim and Nebuchadnezzar's nominee as Zedekiah. The Babylonian month names Kislevu and Adaru correspond to the Hebrew Kislev, December, January, Zechariah 7:1 and Nehemiah 1:1, and Adar, March, April, Ezra 6:15 and Esther 3:7, because the Babylonian calendar appears to have been adopted in Palestine following the Babylonian conquest of the West in 605 BC. There are traces of an earlier, presumably Canaanite calendar in the Old Testament. The 4-month names Abib, Ziv, Ethanim, and Bul, probably representing the equivalents of March and April, April-May, September-October, and October-November on the Western calendar, respectively. This system had been succeeded by one in which the months were referred to by number, and the Babylonian names are only found in such late books as Ezra, Nehemiah, Esther, and Zechariah. Tiberius Claudius Caesar, generally known as Claudius, was proclaimed emperor by the Praetorian Guard after the murder of Gaius, generally known as Caligula, who does not appear in the Bible. Claudius was emperor when the early church was growing, and he was mentioned in the book of Acts as a ruler in whose time a famine took place. That's Acts 11:28. When the Jews of Thessalonica accused Paul and Silas of violating Caesar's decrees by claiming that Jesus was king, he was the emperor in question, Acts 17:7. And he's mentioned by name as having expelled the Jews from Rome, Aquila and Priscilla being among those who came east at that time, according to Acts 18:2. This is an example of Assyrian scale armor. And although this is not the actual exhibit listed in the book, this is what it has to say. This group of bronze scales, stuck together as a result of corrosion in the ground, represents a type of armor well known in the Near East. Examples of the late Bronze Age, 15th to 13th centuries BC, are from Asia Minor, Persia, North Mesopotamia, Syria, Palestine, and Egypt. The present examples, later representatives of the same tradition, were found with a mass of others, many of them iron, in a storeroom, presumably the armorer's store at Fort Shalmaneser, Nimrud. Also in the room were found pottery jars which seem to have contained olive oil, perhaps for lubricating the armor. The Assyrian examples of armor scales appear most commonly to have been laced together through specially located holes so that they would overlap to form a flexible garment. They were less often sewn to cloth or leather backing. Scale armor is mentioned in the Old Testament, where in the description of the armor of Goliath, the Philistine giant, the word Suryan, armor, is qualified as kaskasim, 1 Samuel 17:5, and kaskasim is used in a passage in Deuteronomy which distinguishes clean from unclean foods to describe the scales of a fish, Deuteronomy 14:9. There can be little doubt, therefore, that this passage is saying that Goliath was dressed in scale armor. This is what's called a letter from Yapahu. The Amara letters, of which this are one, are clay tablets inscribed in cuneiform, mostly in the Babylonian language, with messages to Egyptian pharaohs Amenhotep III and Amenhotep IV. They were discovered in 1887 at El Amarna in Egypt, the site of Akhenaten, which was the new capital to which Amenhotep IV moved to establish a religious reform. This was in worship of Aten, the god of the sun disk, as the sole supreme being, in honor of whom Amenhotep changed his name to Akhenaten. Over 350 tablets were found, of which the largest collections are in the Cairo Museum, the British Museum, and the Berlin Museum. They are mainly letters from the contemporary Hittite, Mitannian, and Babylonian kings, and from subject rulers in Palestine, Phoenicia, and Syria. They date from the 4th century BC, a time not long before the Exodus, when Egyptian power in Palestine was waning, and they contain pleas from the subject rulers for help against lawless bands, and also against rulers of neighboring cities, who they frequently accuse of disloyalty to Egypt. The present letter is from Yapahu, the ruler of Gezer, who acknowledges a message from the pharaoh and asks for help against a marauding group of Hapiru. And the text reads, "To the king, my lord, my God, my son, the sun in the sky. Thus says Yapahu, governor of Gezer, your servant, the dust at your feet, the groom of your horses. I surely fall at the feet of the king, my lord, my God, my son, the sun in the sky, 7 times and 7 times, on my stomach and on the back. I have surely heard the words of the messenger of the king, my lord. May the king, my lord, the sun in the sky, care for his land. Since the Hapiru are stronger than us, may the king, my lord, help me to escape from the Hapiru, so the Hapiru do not destroy us." Earlier we read that the Hapiru was possibly the early name for Hebrew, and that's the relationship between this text and the Old Testament. Beridia. Part of a letter from Beridia, the ruler of Megiddo, to the Egyptian pharaoh, explaining to him his failure to convey a prisoner to Egypt, and accusing a man named Zerata of having received ransom money for the prisoner. This letter contains a feature familiar from several of the Amarna letters, in which the scribe supplies translations of some of the Akkadian words. The majority of the letters are in Akkadian and in a vulgar form of the Middle Babylonian dialect, and the translations, or glosses, are placed next to the Akkadian words, separated from them by oblique wedges. The present letter has 2 such glosses, the second one giving a good illustration of the kind of thing involved. In line 35, where the ransom money is referred to, Beridia says that Zerata received the money in his hand, and the main Akkadian text that is written in his hand. Though hand is written with a word sign, in which its pictographic origin can still be recognized, the phonetic complement T shows that it to be read with an I ending. The evidence of these glosses, together with that from the Ugaritic text, also of the 14th and 13th centuries, through the classification of Ugaritic, is much debated, and Ugarit itself lay outside ancient Canaan, gives point to the description of Hebrew as the language of Canaan, Isaiah 19:18. It seems that the Hebrews adopted the language of Canaan either during the patriarchal wanderings in Palestine, Syria, or at the time of the Exodus and conquest, and that it developed into a distinct dialect over the centuries. Syrian tribute list, the small cuneiform tablet, undated but probably of the time of Sargon II or Sennacherib, lists tribute from Ammon, Moab, Judah, Edom, and Byblos. The Babylonian menu, made up of 60 sukla, weighed 505 grams, similar to the Hebrew meneh, used to weigh gold. That's in 1 Kings 10, verse 11. And silver, Ezra 269, Nehemiah 771 and 72, which was made up of 50 shekel, which weighed about 500 grams. In other words, you can check with 2 Samuel 14:26. Jar handles. These handles of pottery jars, which have been stamped before baking with seals, show symbols, either a 4-winged scarab or 2-winged disc, with the milk belonging to the king, written above in Hebrew script in a place named below. Over 800 of these stamped handles have been found at over 20 excavated sites in Palestine, nearly all the territory to which Judah was confined about 700 BC. The place names are Hebron, Ziph, and Soka. The modern name of Hebron is El Khalil, of Ziph is Tel Ziph, and Soka is Kerbet Abad. The fourth name does not occur in the Bible, and its identity has been much discussed. If this identification is accepted and the four places are to be taken to be administrative centers, they are found to lie quite suitably in 4 districts, each made up of 3 of the 12 administrative areas known from earlier biblical texts, such as Joshua 15, 20 through 62. According to this, Soka and Hebron fall respectively within a west and east central district, Ziph within a southern, and MS within a northern district. Stamped handles with all 4 place names have been found throughout Judah, so a possible explanation would be that the products contained in the store jars to which these are handles were first collected at the 4 provincial administrative centers, then passed in bulk to Jerusalem, and were then redistributed from there. A chart of pottery known as the Lachish Ostracon. One of a group of ostraca inscribed in ink and alphabetic Hebrew, which were found in or near the main gate of ancient Lachish. This is the modern Tel Ed Duer, in a burnt layer associated with the destruction of the city in 586 BC. This was the time when the Babylonians under Nebuchadnezzar had invaded Judah and were besieging Zedekiah, Nebuchadnezzar's own rebellious appointee in Jerusalem. According to Jeremiah 34:7, apart from Jerusalem, only Azekah, about 18 miles to the southwest, and Lachish, about 12 miles further, remained in Judean hands as the invasion progressed. The ostraca belong to this time and are mostly letters written from outposts to a man named Yaosh, the military commander at Lachish, reporting on the situation. Most of them use the language of polite formality rather unexpectedly in view of the critical situation which culminated in total defeat. The present example begins, "To my lord Yaosh, may he cause to hear, Yahweh, my lord, news of peace time now, who your servant but a dog, that he should remember my lord his servant." There are several points to note in this passage. In vocabulary and grammar, it is virtually indistinguishable from the Hebrew of the Old Testament. The divine name, Yahweh, is that of God of the Old Testament, where the consonants Yahweh are written with the vowels E, O, A, leading to the familiar form Yehovah, or as Tyndale and his successors wrote it, Jehovah. What they did not realize, however, was that the vowels were intended to remind the reader in a synagogue that he should speak the word Adonai, my Lord, since the divine name was too holy to pronounce. The form Yahweh is based on Greek spellings in the writings of the early Christian fathers. The passage, "Who is your servant but a dog, that my Lord should remember his servant," is fairly closely echoed in 2 Kings 8:13, which includes the phrase, "What is your servant, the dog, that..." More distant echoes of this mode of speech are found in 2 Samuel 9:8 and 16:9. This is the Palestinian room, and I was very graciously allowed to come in here by a gentleman who helps run a section of this museum, and I'd like to thank him right now and get it on tape so he knows I'm serious. This is a side view of the Emperor Tiberius Caesar. Tiberius Claudius Nero was the stepson and subsequently son-in-law of Augustus, and was adopted as his heir following the death of Augustus' adopted grandsons, Gaius and Lucius Caesar. When Augustus died, the Senate conferred the full imperial powers on Tiberius. He was emperor during the years of Jesus' ministry and at the time of his crucifixion. He is referred to as Tiberius Caesar in Luke 3:1, and simply as Caesar elsewhere in the Gospels, Matthew 22:17 and 21, Mark 12:14, 16, and 17, Luke 20:22, 24, 25, 23 verse 2, John 19 verses 12 and 15. Titus, the man who sent his legions to sack Jerusalem in AD 70. Of Nero. Caesar, generally known as Nero, was the last ruler in the Julio-Claudian dynasty founded by Augustus. He was emperor in the time of Paul and is the Caesar to whom he appealed for justice. Acts 25:21 and 28, verse 19. He is referred to in Acts 25:21 and 25 by the title Sebastus, the Greek translation of the Latin Augustus, rendered emperor in the English versions. These are all Roman gods and strange people. They just had their busts made, some of them famous, wives and widows. This is the head of a statue of Hercules. A lot of these are Apollo and Diana from Ephesus, and helmeted Minerva. Venus. There's Cupid. This is the famous discus thrower. Looks like it's been repaired a couple times. These are small figureheads, more gods and goddesses, more pagan deities. This is the tombstone of Timocrates. Among the compositions inscribed in Egyptian hieroglyphics on this papyrus is a story of romance purporting to describe an event in the Palestinian campaign of Tutmosis III, 1479 to 1425 BC. The beginning is damaged, but the story describes how Tutmosis' general Jehuti, having failed to capture the Palestinian city of Joppa by conventional means, succeeds in taking it by a ruse involving the introduction of 200 men concealed in baskets. This document, which is in any case fiction, has no direct bearing on the Old Testament, but it is reasonable to take it as reflecting the situation in Canaan in the last centuries before the Israelite conquest. Joppa, which was in the territory later assigned to the tribe of Dan, in Joshua 19:46, is the only natural harbor on the coast between the Egyptian frontier and the Bay of Acre. It is described as the port to which cedar wood from Lebanon for use in the building of Solomon's temple was floated, and from which it was transported overland to Jerusalem, 2 Chronicles 2:16, and as the port from which Jonah embarked for the West Mediterranean, Jonah 1:3. A relevant element near the beginning of the surviving part of the story appears when the invading general asks the defenders to let his horses be brought into town because they are vulnerable to the Apiru. This is another appearance of these people known from many other texts, and just as, for instance, references to gypsies in a Jane Austen novel give a valid impression of their place in 18th century England, so the reference to Apiru in this fictional work gives an idea of their role circa 1250 BC, if not in the 15th century. This brick is made of Nile mud and with chopped straw as a binder, and has been stamped with a seal bearing a cartouche containing hieroglyphics reading Usima Re Sepenre, part of the official name of Ramesses II. While the Pharaoh of Exodus is not named, being referred to in the Old Testament only as Pharaoh, for example, Exodus 1:11. Ramesses II is a strong contender. The Hebrew Pharaoh is derived from the Egyptian Pra, great house, which was used from at least the 14th century BC to refer to the king. The Israelites are described as building store cities at Pithom and Ramesses with clay and brick, Exodus 1:11 through 14. That straw was regarded as a normal ingredient is shown by the imposition later on one of the extra duty on the Israelites to collect their own straw for brickmaking, Exodus 5:6 through 13. The cities referred to, Pithom, Hebrew Pithom, from Egyptian Pritim, house of Atum or Atum, and Ramesses, the Hebrew Ra'amesses, from the Egyptian Hermes, house of Ramesses, are possibly to be identified respectively with Tel Retaba in the Wadi Tumulat, and with an era on the Pelusic branch of the Nile, including Kata'ana, Tel Ed Daba, and Kantir. This is what has been nicknamed the Temptation Seal. This cylinder seal was related to the temptation of Eve in the Garden of Eden, Genesis 3:1 through 13, by George Smith at a British museum. Of it he wrote, "One striking and important specimen of early type of the British Museum has two figures sitting, one on each side of a tree, holding out their hands to a fruit, while at the back of one is stretched at a serpent. We know well that in these early sculptures none of these figures were chance devices, but all represented events or supposed events and figures in their legends. Thus it is evident that a form of the story of the fall, similar to that of Genesis, was known in early times in Babylonia." Such an interpretation has been given many times since. In fact, the seal belongs to a well-known genre of Akkadian and post-Akkadian periods in Mesopotamia and shows a seated male figure identified by his headdress as a deity facing a female worshiper. Not necessarily like this doesn't look like that, but Both figures are fully clothed. The date palm between them and the snake may have had a fertility significance, and there is no reason to connect the scene with the Adam and Eve story. Well, that may not be, but this certainly looks close. This clay cylinder is inscribed in Babylonian cuneiform with an account by Cyrus, king of Persia, of his conquest of Babylon in 539 BC and capture of Nabonidus, the last Babylonian king. He claims to have achieved this with the aid of Marduk, the god of Babylon. He then describes measures of relief which he brought to the inhabitants of the city and tells how he returned a number of god images which Nabonidus had collected in Babylon to their proper temples throughout Babylonia, Assyria, and western Iran. At the same time, he arranged for the restoration of these temples and organized the return to their homelands of a number of people who had been held in Babylonia by the Babylonian kings. Though this account refers only to Mesopotamia and Iran, it represents a policy which he carried out throughout his newly conquered empire, and the document transcribed in Ezra 6, 3-5, authorizing the rebuilding of Jerusalem temple, and the subsequent return of the Jews, Ezra 2, to Palestine, were manifestations of this policy. This cylinder has sometimes been described as the first charter of human rights, but this reflects a misunderstanding. From as early as the 3rd millennium BC, kings in Mesopotamia often began their reigns with declaration of reforms, and this document simply follows in this long tradition. I've been here all day and they're throwing me out now, so I missed a lot. Well, actually only a couple that I wanted to get. But
Have you finished? I can turn the light.
I don't want to break any rules.
Okay. Tony, that's it. Closing now, please. On the other side.
Yeah, then go.
This is the Indian room. The pagan gods. Buddhas and Shivas and such. This is a medieval European on the way out. Roman Britain. This is a Roman floor, Roman mosaic floor from a villa at Hinton Street. It's going to be Hinton St. Mary, Dorset, 4th century AD. The mosaic forms the floor of 2 adjoining rooms. The portrait in the center of the largest section includes a sacred monogram used by early Christians and probably represents Christ. Looks like a cross with a sword in it. Look at that pig with a cross polo mallet. All right.